All right, so to start with, you guys, I've got, anybody know what these are?
Flags.
Right?
Like soccer things?
Right? Penalty flags, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I got to get over here. So you guys are the referees, okay? If I say anything political, you throw a flag, all right? We're going to talk about the structure of our government and how the structure, what they built in the structure, secures our rights. So if I get off base, I say anything political, you just throw one of those flags at me. Go ahead, throw it as hard as you want. Now, I'm glad that you're here, and you got here just in time, because I have good news and bad news for you. And the bad news is we're in trouble. Our country is in serious trouble. And we could admire the problem for a long time. We'll admire it a little bit tonight, but it's serious. And you know, after we're through what we're talking about, I'm happy to go as deep as you want, but it's a serious problem that we've got. Now, the good news is that you're here. And the good news is that quite literally the fate of our nation depends on you. Now, the really, really good news is we can fix this in as little as 5 minutes a week. How many of you could spare 5 minutes in a week? Right? 5 minutes, right? And in some weeks it would be even less than that. The really good news is there are 6 simple principles, and we're going to go through them one at a time. And as we know, the principles of our government, what they designed for us, the tool, the machine that they designed for us to govern, you can do your job in as little as 5 minutes a week. Everybody still in? Now I got to give you the fine print because I'm an attorney. There's always fine print in an agreement, right? See, here we go. It's not political yet, but the fine print on this is you don't ever get a week off ever again. Right? If you're, somebody's having a baby, or you got laid off, or you're sick, 5 minutes a week. Now the good thing is, as we do this together, some weeks you can do your job in as little as 30 seconds a week. But you don't ever get a week off. Is everybody still in? Is that okay? You're good with that? We got to do something every single week. We're still in? Nobody's leaving yet? That's a good thing. All right, let's get going. So I want you to imagine that you're the boss of a company, a club, an organization, whatever. We've all been in charge of something, right? So you're the boss, but you don't hardly ever show up. And when you need employees, you just go out on the street and you just hire whoever you find. We used to call it, my dad had car washes, and we would call it the fog the mirror test, right? If they could fog a mirror, you'd hire them. That's how you're hiring people for your organization. And you don't give them the job description because you don't really know what it is, and you don't ever follow up to see how they're doing. How well is that going to work? Right? 10 out of 10 times that fails. 100% of the time that fails. Well, W. Edwards Deming is a guy, he's the total quality management guy. We rejected him in the United States, and so he went to Japan after the Second World War, and he taught the Japanese about total quality management and just-in-time inventory. They have statues built to him all over Japan. I worked there for quite a while. I worked for the mayor of the city of Osaka. And they lionize him. He's so famous there. But I love this statement that he says. He says, every system is perfectly designed to achieve the results that it gets. Right? Every system is perfectly designed to achieve the results that it gets. What kind of results are we getting in our government right now? Right? 37 trillion in debt. We're going to look at some of that. But here's the system. This system, the first and fundamental principle. How many of you know who James Wilson is? James Wilson is awesome. I love James Wilson. Get this. So James Wilson signed the Declaration of Independence. He signed the Constitution. He was one of the ones at the Constitutional Convention. He's one of only 6 that did that, right? So he's a pretty small club right there. But then he became a club of 1 because he was an original member of the Supreme Court. And when George Washington won and he was establishing his first cabinet, he calls on Judge Wilson to teach the indispensable man and his cabinet about this new Constitution. Think about that, right? George Washington presided over the Constitutional Convention, and he asks Judge Wilson to teach them the principles of the new Constitution. Wouldn't you love to have been in that class, right? He says, the dread and redoubtable sovereign, the feared and ultimately to be respected sovereign, has been found where he ought to have been found, in the free and independent man. He says, this truth, so simple and natural, yet so neglected or despised, may be appreciated as the first and fundamental principle in the science of government. Think about that. The very first principle in American government. People are sovereign. Right at the heart of this organization, you're the boss. Think about how we approach this organization that we're the boss of, right? About a third of us show up in a general election. Hardly any of us show up during a municipal election. Do you know that like the city of Los Angeles, 20 million people, the mayor of the city of Los Angeles has been decided on less than 2% of the vote? Right?
They have who they have.
About a third of us show up. Now, we don't often know who we're even voting for. Right? We kind of go red flyer, blue flyer, and we don't give our employees, our agents, their job description because we're not really taught what it is anymore, right? And how often do we check up with them and sit down and say, hey, here was the job description, here's the objective that I gave you, how's it going? We don't do that, right? It's not even part of our conversation to think about that. So is it any wonder how our country is going when the boss barely ever shows up and we don't know who our employees are and we don't give them the job description, we don't follow up? Remember, 10 out of 10 times that organization fails. We all know this, right? The buck stops right here, right? The buck stops here, and so that's part of the good news and the bad news, right? The bad news is it's a mess. The good news is we can do something about it. The bad news is we're responsible for this, and the good news is we're response-able. Let's take a look. We're going to admire the problem for just a little bit. We're not going to go too far on that. This was a unanimous resolution from the U.S. Senate just a little more than a year ago. Little more than a year ago, this was recognizing the national debt as a threat to national security. This was back in the good old days when the debt was $34 trillion. You know what it is now? Just a little over a year later, $37.5 trillion. Now, I went to public school, but 37.5 minus 34 is a $3.5 trillion deficit in 1 year that we're overspending. Total interest back then was $659 billion. Now it's over $1 trillion a year, just the interest on the debt. The deficit back then, they were saying $1.7 trillion. Now it's in excess of $2 trillion forever. They said that China and Europe are developing alternate payment systems to dethrone the dollar as a reserve currency. And when that happens, the credit card is gone. We can't just overspend with impunity and print more money. And that's happening as we speak. Interest exceeds national defense. There's a law, a political science law, that says when your interest expense exceeds your national defense costs, you're done as a superpower. Deficits are unsustainable, irresponsible, and dangerous. That's kind of the biggest understatement in the history of government, right? Well, this is their plan. I don't know how many of you do your budget like this, where your spending is going to exceed your revenues forever. You sit down with your spouse and you say, hey, I got a great idea. Let's just spend about 50% more than we bring in forever. In what universe does that work? Doesn't work any different in government. They'll tell you, oh, government's different. It's not different, friends. It's not different. Because at some point, those notes will be called due. At some point, you run out of road to kick the can. At some point, you water down the soup so much that it just water, right? You print so much money that the dollars become worth less and less and less until they're worthless. That's why homes are so expensive. That's why prices are going up, because they're increasing the money supply. More than a quarter of all dollars in existence were created in the last 4 years. This is what's happening right now in our government. Interest expense, the second largest expense in the federal budget right now is interest. And it's the fastest growing expense. It's growing 10 times faster than everything else. Within a couple years, that's going to be the largest expense. I don't have the slide up here, but Social Security Trust Fund, Medicare Trust Fund, goes to zero in 6 years. But they've always overshot on their estimates. Right? In the 80s, they said it was going to be 60 years before that trust fund goes to zero, and then it's going to be 20, and then it's going to be 15, and then just in June, they said it's going to be 6 years that the Social Security and Medicare trust funds go to zero, and they're not even talking about it. But that's going to come right to us. So here you've got, you got the GAO, it's unsustainable. Congressional Budget Office, it's unsustainable. U.S. Treasury, fiscal path is unsustainable. Everybody says this is unsustainable. Do you know what unsustainable means? It's going to end. By definition, that which is unsustainable will end. And everyone knows that what's happening with our government in Washington is unsustainable. So we've got millennials today. This is the first time in history that the next generation is likely to be worse off than their parents. That was always the American promise, right? The American promise, we're going to leave it better for our children than we received it from our forebears. We're leaving it worse off than we found it. This is my little guy. This is one of my 4 grandchildren. He tells his mom, I'm Grandpa's little guy. And, we're going to answer to them. You all have somebody that you know that we're going to answer to for what's happening in our nation. This is also my little guy. My daughter, one morning, she wakes up and she just sees flour everywhere in the house. And she's looking around and she comes up here and she sees him. You see there, his little panda bear's up here surveying the scene, right? And 2-year-olds, he was 2, he's not 2 anymore, but he was 2 then. And you all know 2-year-olds, right? 2-year-old, you could teach them. You could scold them. You can give them a timeout. You can lecture them. You try to model for them, and they're still going to make a mess. It's what 2-year-olds do, right? If you don't have backup, and you need to go to the restroom, or you need to go do something, and you don't have a backup, and they make a mess, it's not the 2-year-old's fault, right? It's not their fault, it's our fault. The founders of the United States of America knew that government is just like a 2-year-old. They knew that. Government makes messes. It's what it does. It's not a bug, it's a feature. And so they designed our government with checks, on limits, on divisions, on balance. And if we're not maintaining the limits and the balance and the division, our government makes a mess. It's not government's fault, right? Right here. Because they designed it with those checks and the limits and the balance. And if we're not maintaining them meticulously, it's not government's fault. That's what government does. Now, when my daughter saw him this way, the first thing he said is he puts up his hands. He says, "Don't see me, Mom. Don't see me." Just like government. When government makes a mess, don't see me. It's our job to make sure we know what's going on. That's the bad news. You ready for the good news? We could go off on the bad news for a long time. There's a lot of problems to admire, but the good news is there are no easy answers, but there are simple ones, President Reagan said. We have to have the moral courage to do what we know is right. The best news is it really doesn't take that much. Now, this is George Mason. George Mason was one of the original founders, and he wrote the Virginia Declaration of Rights. And Article 15 of the Virginia Declaration of Rights was put in every state constitution in one form or another. No free government or the blessings of liberty can be preserved to any people, but by a frequent recurrence to fundamental principles. In Utah's Constitution, it reads like this, Article 1, Section 27. And they actually call it right in our Constitution, fundamental rights. Frequent recurrence to fundamental principles is essential. In some constitutions, it says absolutely necessary to the security of individual rights and the perpetuity of free government. Anybody want individual rights? And anybody want perpetuity of free government? What does frequent recurrence mean? What does that mean? Frequent recurrence.
Happens often. Happens often.
Often, right? Go back to it often. What else did you say over here? Go back to it again and again and again. Frequent recurrence. We found a law review article. Actually, one of those two law professors I was telling you about earlier at University of Utah, one of his students wrote a law review article on what does this mean? What were the fundamental principles they were talking about? You know what they are? Popular sovereignty, you're the boss, and federalism. The structure of our government that divides power between the national government and the states. Those are the fundamental principles we're supposed to go back to again and again and again, but only if we want individual rights and if we want our free government to continue. If you don't want that, then just, don't worry about that stuff. Which is what we've been doing for years. I've asked state legislators all across the nation. There's about 8,300 state legislators. I've probably asked 1,000 of them over the years. What's your training like when you're elected to state government, right? What's your training like? And that's the most common answer. They just laugh. They just laugh. So the people that you entrust with your life, your liberty, your property, get no training on the fundamental principles. Even though their Constitution, our Constitution, says frequent recurrence to fundamental principles is essential to the security of individual rights and perpetuity of free government. Now, in a class that we did, this class last year, I had somebody in the class on the front row, and he says, well, how come they don't know these things? I said, well, who do you think would be responsible for making that happen? And he thought for just a second. He says, us. That's right. And because of that, and because of his interest in that, we proposed a bill last year that passed. It was House Bill 488. Federalism amendments doesn't sound very, very sexy. We don't put crazy names on our bills in Utah. The staff actually names them. But House Bill 488 passed unanimously in the House and almost unanimously in the Senate. I didn't have time to educate over there as much in the House. But it's about putting structure over politics. It's about getting back to these fundamental principles and continuing education for all state leaders. Legislators, legislative staff, agency staff. That's already happening, you guys. We're starting right now. In fact, I got emails today that they're starting to do the initial meetings with a bunch of the agencies. I mean, hairdressers have to have continuing education, right? Plumbers, electricians, teachers, doctors, lawyers. Shouldn't those that have life, liberty, property, your life, liberty, property in their hands, shouldn't they have to frequently recur to fundamental principles if that's what the founders said, and it was enough that they put it in every state constitution? You guys, that's starting to happen right now. The only way that it keeps going and that we keep taking it seriously is if the boss makes sure that there's continuing education happening in your organization, right? That's the boss's job. Do my employees know their job? Have we made regular the job description, the roles and responsibilities? That's your job. It's starting to happen, but it's only going to continue to happen if you continue to require it. All right, so guys, here's the 6 simple principles. Once we go through these 6 simple principles, you do your job in as little as 5 minutes a week, sometimes 30 seconds. We got 3 principles and 3 practices. The first principle is what we're talking about tonight. You're the boss. You are the sovereign of American government. We don't talk about that word very often. Sometimes we even are embarrassed to say that the people are sovereign, because some people have gone and tried to do, something or some other thing. You're the sovereign of American government. Supremely efficacious is one of the definitions. The highest authority, ultimate power. Think about that. That's you. The second principle we'll talk about next week, it's the structure, the exceptional structure of American government that secures our rights. Our third class, we're going to talk about how the states are responsible for that structure, for the balance and the limits and the divisions, which means you're responsible for the character, the skills, the ability of the people that you hire. Do they know the structure? Do they know the job description? Are you hiring people that have the character, that know that they're a fiduciary? We're going to talk about that in Class 4. Class 5 is the 3 P's for delegating your sovereign responsibility. How do we get people to do what we need them to do? We're going to talk about that. Personal, professional, persistent. We'll talk about that in Class 5. Class 6 is multi-level liberty. We ought to be better than that in Utah than anybody else anywhere, right? Multi-level liberty. How do we leverage our voice? Because any one of us are only one of 40,000 in a House district, one of 120,000 in a Senate district, one of 3.5 million in the state. But how do we leverage our voice? And I'll tell you, it doesn't take a lot. You're going to be shocked at how few voices it takes to make sure that your representative, your senator, even your governor is doing the job description that you've given them. We'll talk about that in Class 6. That's when we get to the 5 minutes a week. Once we know the principles, then you can do your job in 5 minutes a week. And if you're having a tough week, 30 seconds a week. But remember, we don't ever get a week off ever again, right? So you guys know Franklin, right? Franklin comes out of the Constitutional Convention. Mrs. Powell is sitting there and she says, "Dr. Franklin, what have you given us?" A republic if you can keep it. A republic if you can keep it. You know, we kind of think Franklin, oh, Dr. Franklin, Benjamin Franklin, he's so witty, that's so clever, that's so cute. No, it's serious. That's serious, and he meant it seriously. A republic if you can keep it. Well, that's what we're going to talk about, and it's not nearly as hard as you might think. King Louis XVI in France, I love this story, you guys. King Louis XVI, he's deposed from the throne. And the bad guys that depose him, they capture his son, the prince. And week after week, they try to ply him with decadent food and liquor and women and everything they could do to try to just debauch and degrade this prince so that they could control him. And week after week, they would try to just exercise this addiction over him, and nothing worked. And finally, after a long time, they just exasperated, gave up. They said, "Why won't you partake of these things? Everyone does. Everyone succumbs to this. Why won't you?" He says, I can't do what you ask. I was born to be a king. I was born to be a king. And in the United States of America, folks, you were born to be a queen, and you were born to be a king. You were born to self-govern and to rule in your sphere of influence and govern yourself and your family and your community and your nation. That's what the pursuit of happiness means. Pursuit of happiness, that term goes back, into Greece periods. It goes way back. Pursuit of happiness meant I'm going to govern myself and I'm going to grow and become the best I can be. And then I'm going to exercise that influence in my family and in my community to the greatest extent possible. It's not just, let's go have a party and, it's Miller time or whatever, right? That's not pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness is how it's the glue that holds America together. Because you were born to be a king and born to be a queen. I always think about this, right? Imagine if you had a child that was going to be the king or the queen. Can you think of what you would want them to know? Right? You think of the things that they would need to know to be a good ruler. Math, science, economics, political science, public relations, the things that they would need to know. When you're the boss of a company, you don't just order people around and sit back and think, I got it made. It's difficult to be the boss. You've got to know where this organization is going. And delegation could be very challenging, but that's our charge, to know how to do that, to know how to govern the greatest nation in the history of the earth. And again, it's not that hard if we are keeping an eye on it every single week. Thomas Jefferson, man, that guy's amazing. He left 66 volumes of writing, right? Thomas Jefferson. Sometimes it said that man can't be trusted with government of himself. Can he then be trusted with the government of others? Or have we found angels in the form of kings to govern him? He says, let history answer that question. The mass of mankind has not been born with saddles on their back, nor a favored few booted and spurred, ready to ride legitimately by the grace of God. Every government degenerates when trusted to the rulers of the people alone. The people themselves, therefore, are its only safe depository. You guys, they had debates about this. They debate, can the people really be trusted with their government? You know, the way we say it today, oh, the masses are asses is a colloquial way of saying it. But the people are too dumb to govern themselves. Not in America. Not in America. Our country was founded on the belief that the people can, should, and must govern themselves and govern the nation. This is not a spectator sport, friends. Our government is not a spectator sport. We're to be engaged as the boss of our government. That's why it says right there in the document, right? We, the people, about a gajillion times bigger than everything else. You think they were trying to tell us something? Everything else is down here, scribble, 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 scribble. We, the people, govern this nation. They weren't trying to hide it. It wasn't a secret. It's right there. George Mason, again, he tells us all power was originally lodged in and consequently is derived from the people. Now get this. We should wear it as a breastplate and buckle it on as our armor. You know, there are people that conceal carry and they will not go out of the house in the morning without their firearm, and they buckle that on. We have the right to defend ourselves. You know, we look in the mirror and we get all ready and we want to make sure things are just right before we leave the house. If I got everything, I got my car keys, I got my wallet, am I ready to go? That all power is lodged in the people. We should wear that as a breastplate, buckle it on as our armor every single day that we get ready to go out. You're the boss. Good news and bad news, right? We're responsible. But we're also able to do something about it. Yes, we did produce a near-perfect republic, he says, Jefferson. But will they keep it? Just what Franklin said, right? Or, think of how prescient they were, you guys. Or will they, in the enjoyment of plenty, lose the memory of freedom? Material abundance without character is the surest way to destruction. A republic if you can keep it, right? Jonathan Turley, we see him on the news quite a lot. He says America has a crisis of faith. Polls show that Americans are rejecting the Constitution, embracing violence. Many people think civil war is coming. In fact, leading up to the last election, you know how you can search the Google search terms and the terms that are trending? Civil war was one of the most popular terms leading into the last election. You guys, that's serious. That's serious. I don't care what party you are. I don't care what, your politics are. To think that in the United States of America, civil war is a search term when we're leading into elections, that's not right. And the fact that we're now fighting for control of an executive order pen in D.C. Do we have a blue king or a red king? I don't want a king. I don't want a blue king or a red king. I want to govern myself right here in Utah. And Danny that's online there in Texas, and Susan in Michigan. Govern ourselves where we can be different in Utah and different in Texas and California and Michigan and New Hampshire. And then we stand together for the big stuff, like world peace and a sound monetary system. Get that right, and then you can, even then, don't come thinking about my sidewalks and my schools and stuff in my community. We govern ourselves. This is my guy. This is my little guy, right? They were here. They spent the summer here. My daughter was going to the Park City Culinary Institute all summer. They spent the summer with us. And man, this little guy, he's up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:30, 6 o'clock. He's just outside my door waiting. Just waiting. And as soon as I crack the door, Grandpa's awake! And it's on all day long, you know. It's on all day long. And with his sisters and my other granddaughter that lives just a couple blocks from here, I know they're going to ask me two questions. And the ones that you know are going to ask you two questions. They're going to say, did you see this coming? Right? When they're dealing with 300% debt to GDP, when the dollar has been so devalued that it doesn't buy anything. It's already been devalued 90% or more since we had a Federal Reserve. It's been devalued about 80% since 1971 when we went off the gold standard that's right there in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 10, no state shall make anything but gold and silver legal tender for payment of debts. We've lost 85% of the value of our dollar since then when we didn't follow the Constitution. And you think about what's going to happen to them. What's the next question they're going to ask, right? They're going to say, did you see it coming? What's the second question? What'd you do about it? What'd you do about it? You guys, that question haunts me. I think about that all the time. That's why I ran for office in the first place. That's why I stayed in office. I stepped out for a little bit, and the guy that replaced me resigned. He says, you want to come back? I said, no. My wife put an expletive in front of no, and she's not the cussing sort. But man, we prayed about it, and we got to teach. We got to teach people how to manage and operate and be the sovereign of their own government again. And I can reach more people in office than out, and that's what I felt when I was praying about it, because I think about them all the time, you guys. Samuel Adams tells us the liberties of our country, the freedom of our civil constitution, they're worth defending at all hazards. Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men and women of courage, undergo the fatigues of supporting it. This is not a spectator sport. We need to be actively engaged in our government. And I love this Condoleezza Rice. I'm an American. Nothing is impossible. You guys, it's serious what's going on with our country. It is heart attack serious. But nothing is impossible, especially as we work together. So here's your assignment for this week. This is your homework, okay? This class is a laboratory class, right? You got homework every week. It's simple enough that you can do it. I want you to go on the iGovern website, igovern.us, and you can grab one of the cards and one of the things out here. Get on the website, and then there's an impact community for each state. Get into your impact community, and that's where you can ask questions and interact, and it's lifting where we stand is going to take all of us. But get on that website is one, and the second one is share with one other person. You know, just someone that maybe has a 2-year-old that they care about. Share with them, what does it mean that the first principle in the science of our government, he called it, is that the people are sovereign. What does that mean? Right? What does that mean that the people are sovereign? Like a king, like a queen in a country. What does that mean? What does that mean we should be doing? Just share that with one other person. We're going to start off with that next time. I want to hear your stories about what happens when you share with someone. What does that mean? That they founded our entire government, the very first principle. James Wilson taught Washington and his cabinet, the people are sovereign. Here you can get on, this is what the impact communities look like. There's actually a workbook under this learning tab. So there's so much more material. You guys, I could talk to you for a week just on this one principle about the people are sovereign. We put all that in the workbook that you can find right there in that learning tab, and we'll keep adding to it. And if you see things in there, let us know. But then in this discussion group, this is where we start leveraging our voice, and we start working on that. We'll start talking about that more, but get on that website. I've got, if you want, over there, this is this is the job description I wrote to myself when I was just about to be elected, 2010. I'm running for office the very first time. And we get to the Constitution. We get to Article 6. I lost a whole bunch of weight after the 2017 session, and my wife was taking my suits to all be taken in, and she says, "You actually have a Constitution in every one of your suit pockets." I said, "Yeah, I do." Article 6 of the Constitution says the senators and representatives of the states, members of the several state legislatures, and executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. I'm 2 weeks away from the first election, and we were reading the Constitution as a family because we're kind of weird like that, and we're going through it. I thought I ought to know what I'm signing up for. And you guys, I could just see George Washington, Thomas Jefferson just looking at me going, "You're going to swear an oath to uphold this document." And that hit me like a ton of bricks. What did they expect me to do? How am I supposed to do? What power do I have to do that? And I started reading the Federalist Papers and reading their writings and studying and making my notes. And finally, I took my trailer and went up in the mountains all by myself. I'd never done that before. I spent a couple days up there just writing. And this was an outline that I did. And this was just for me. And I shared it with this law professor that's on here, Rob Nadelson. He's probably one of the most single, individually cited people by the United States Supreme Court. He's a constitutional historian. I remember right where I was driving when he called me, and he said, "Man, this is good. We ought to publish this. Can I write a foreword to it?" And so we did that in 2011. That was just my job description to me. Now we're working on the sequel that we call Just Say No, K-N-O-W. You are the answer to what ails America. You are the answer to state representatives and governors and attorneys general knowing who they are in the system to maintain those limits, divisions, and ballots. Next week, we're going to talk about there we go. Next week, we're going to talk about the structure that you're the boss of. We're going to talk about the structure that you get to maintain, the roles and responsibilities and those tolerances and the limits and the balance. That it's your job to give that job description to your agents so that you know what to hold them accountable to. That's where we're going next week. And we'll end with this, you guys. It does not take a majority to prevail. And man, I can bear witness to this. I've seen so many individual people come up to the state capitol. In fact, it's one of the things that really fires me up about government. You see one person come up and say, "Man, there ought to be a law. That law ought to be different." And they can join with others and they can tell their story and they come to committee and tell their story. And then we get to tell their story on the floor, and then we get to tell the story in the Senate. And then we get to convince a governor, and you can see that one person changes the law right here in the state. We can do that. I've seen it happen dozens and dozens of times. It does not take a majority to prevail. It just takes an irate, tireless minority keen on setting brush fires in people's minds. And so I'll ask you, we've got those two questions, right? Did you see it coming? What are you going to do about it? What did you do about it? And I'm counting on you to be some of those people, light tiny little brush fires in people's minds, because together, 5 minutes a week, we can fix this. We can restore American self-government, because this is not a spectator sport. I'm so grateful that you're here. I'm grateful that you are standing up and ready to put our country back on track. And if you'll stick with us, I promise you, by the time we get to the end, you'll see how we do this in 5 minutes. We've got Danny on here that he didn't believe it at first. He went all the way through and started working it, and man, he's like, this actually works. So guys, thank you so much, and I'm counting on you, and together 5 minutes a week we can make this happen. Thank you for being here.